Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again, and it is time for my Chelsea team of the decade, the 2010s. What a successful period in the club's history, and so many amazing players to choose from in this 11. When you look at the decade of what the club has won: 3 Premier League titles, a Champions League, 2 Europa Leagues, 3 FA Cups, a League Cup, over 300 wins, 10 head coaches, tons of goals and memorable moments for fans to savour. It was always going to be a difficult 11 to choose, but this is my 11. I'm going to go with 4-4-2 formation, simply to get all the players I want in this team and to give them the credit they deserve. I'm sure you will have different 11s to mine, so let me know yours in the comments below. But let's get to it. Firstly, with the goalkeeper. So in goal, I think really there's only one choice you can choose, and that is the legend that is Petr Cech, Chelsea's greatest ever shot stopper. And I think, yes, you could obviously give a mention to Thibaut Courtois. Despite his very bitter exit from the club, he was essential in 2 title wins and an FA Cup victory. But really, when you compare his career to the career of Petr Cech at Chelsea, it pales in comparison. This is a legend, an icon at the club, and he was such a linchpin of Chelsea, a leader in defence, really helped stabilise that defence so many times, made so many amazing saves, big saves in big occasions for Chelsea. So for me, now being a statesman back at the club, working at the club, so well liked, such a good person to speak about the game, and I think someone that's so adored at the club. So for me, Petr Cech has to be in goal. Simply, when we just isolate it within Munich, he not only saved 1, not 2, but 3 penalties in that night to help Chelsea win European glory. So Petr Cech is my goalkeeper. At right back, it's going to be Branislav Ivanovic. Brana, for me, has to be in this team, simply for the big goals he scored within this decade. You think of the goal against Napoli that took us through to the quarterfinals in 2012. You think of the winner, that towering header in Amsterdam to win us the Europa League in the final seconds of that final. And I think he was so essential in the title win in 2015. His physicality, his character, his willingness. I think he was someone that was so essential to Chelsea's successful dressing room. And I think in some ways we maybe lack some of Brana's personality and character now, and you can see it whenever he's posted videos recently of him, and now of course at Zenit. Chelsea fans miss him and miss him greatly, and simply because you could always rely on Brana for a big goal and mostly a big header in big moments. So Brana has to be in my defence in this 11. First centre-back for me is going to be Gary Cahill. I think he has to be in this 11. He really has been a stalwart at the back during this decade for Chelsea, has been selected by a number of managers, has, I think, proved people wrong. He started the decade at Bolton, who were getting closer to relegation, and when he moved to Chelsea, within a couple of months, he'd not only won an FA Cup, but won a Champions League, where he starred in the final, put in some amazing defensive blocks, and he was playing that game mostly injured, which is an heroic display, really. And I think Gary Cahill, for me, will mostly be regarded because of the work and the player he played with predominantly at Chelsea. But I think probably personally there'll be more vindication in that 16-17 season where he played in a back 3 and was brilliant as captain of Chelsea. And I think, as I said, proving people wrong. I think the fact that he stayed at Chelsea for so long and was continually one of Chelsea's starting players, always one of the first names on the team sheet, I think proves to you how essential he was. And you think about it, individually successful this decade as a player, Gary Cahill is going to be right up there, has won everything the game's had to offer in this 10-year period. And what a career Gary Cahill has had now he's left the club. And one Gary Cahill, so that's my first centre-back. Second centre-back, you know who it's going to be. It's captain leader legend JT. Really helped Cahill during some difficult periods. I think was such a great partnership they found there. And JT was a player who was doubted at the start of this decade, with injuries piling up, with managers like Villas-Boas and Benitez not picking him. There was a belief that maybe the game had passed JT by. But when Mourinho came back in 2013, he revitalised JT's career. And you could make an argument that in 13-14 and 14-15, those were the 2 best years of JT's career at Chelsea. He was incredible. He played every minute of every Premier League match during that title-winning season in 2014-15. I thought he was astonishing during that. And the great thing for him, being an icon of Chelsea, Chelsea's greatest ever defender and Chelsea's greatest ever leader, was he got to end on an emotional high and a successful one in 16-17, lifting that Premier League trophy and giving an emotional farewell, which fans will savour forever. So for me, even though he's been overlooked in a lot of Premier League team of the decades, which I think are criminal, he's not overlooked here. So JT completes my centre-back pairing. And at left-back, it's tough not to put Ashley Cole in this team, simply once again for his contribution to Chelsea, how much he was adored at the club. But I think for longevity within this decade of a player who has continually been at Chelsea for the longest time, and is a current player as well who's continued to play for Chelsea now, I have to give it to Cesar Azpilicueta. I think consistency for me is the word that pops up when I think of Azpilicueta. Another player like Cahill who has continually been in Chelsea's back four. Mourinho's quote that he'd love to have 11 Azpilicuetas in a team, I think sums up his quality. A versatile player who has played pretty much along the back four for Chelsea during his time at the club. It now seems ridiculous that he only cost Chelsea 7 million from Marseille in 2012, wasn't it? And he has been one of Chelsea's best performers, really stepping up on the occasion. And I think it's a player you always want on big occasions because he usually gives you an amazing performance. So Dave is in this team. Now we go into midfield. As I say, there are some incredible players who probably are going to miss out on this. Starting off with N'Golo Kante. When you actually think about it, he didn't actually arrive in England till halfway through the decade in 2015 when Leicester bought him. He was instrumental in their title win. And then when he left for Chelsea, he was instrumental in our title win in 16-17. Transforming the position, I think, is the thing I think about N'Golo. He's improved his attacking play. He is so much more than just a defensive midfielder. I think it's almost a discredit to him when people label him a holding midfielder because he's not that. He can run, he can dribble, he's an amazing tackler, one of the best in the game, probably the best the game's ever seen. Can drive, can sprint, can score some incredible goals as we've seen during the years, can cover every blade of grass on that pitch. Is there anything N'Golo can't do? So that's why he makes my team. Next is, in my opinion, Chelsea's greatest ever player and current head coach, Frank Lampard, who is in the centre of this midfield, really cemented himself with that tag of becoming the club's highest ever goal scorer in 2013, overtaking Bobby Tambling with 203 goals for the club, and captained the side to 2 European triumphs against Benfica and Bayern Munich in consecutive years. And I think it's amazing that Lampard has now come full circle with the club and ends the decade as the club's head coach. I think if you'd said that at the start of the decade to Chelsea fans, they wouldn't have believed you. But when you actually look at the start of the decade, he started it with that 27-goal season where we won the league under Ancelotti. I think just proving what an incredible midfielder he was. For me, the greatest English midfielder of all time. Of course, I'm biased, but pretty simply an irreplaceable player who has to be in this 11. The other central midfielder is a player that I think if you told most Chelsea fans in 2010 they were going to fall in love with and would be sad to see him go, I think they would have laughed at you mostly, and that is Cesc Fabregas, who started the decade at Arsenal, then went to Barcelona, and then came to Chelsea. He came a couple months after Lampard left the club, and really for me sort of changed the midfielder you'd sort of seen at Chelsea. We'd never seen a midfielder quite like Fabregas before. With the ease he glided across the pitch, it was a delight to watch Fabregas at his best at Chelsea. And that pass against Burnley on his debut, probably one of the assists of the Premier League era, and was such a classy player. Was a player who, as I say, was loved by the fans and was in part for one of the greatest chants I've heard in recent years at Chelsea. And as well, of course, was so successful at the club, led the club to 2 Premier League titles, was instrumental in that with connecting with another player who's going to be on this 11. And for me, Fabregas was a player I think almost changed the mould of a midfielder at Chelsea, where now you see a player like Jorginho, a player like Kovacic coming into the side. You wouldn't have seen that 10 years ago. But I think Fabregas coming in definitely played a part in that. So for me, Cesc is in this midfield. Now we go to what for me is Chelsea's player of the decade, really the player that defined this decade. And of course that is the Belgian Eden Hazard. Magic, breathtaking, wonderful, sublime. His individual goals were absolutely astonishing to witness. Luckily, I was there for most of them, and seeing them live were a thing to behold, really. One of the most talented players you're ever likely to see play for Chelsea. And the great thing about Eden was how successful he was at the club, and really for me started a new era at Chelsea once the Champions League had happened and we'd won it, and those players, the spine of Chelsea's team before, started to fade. It was up to Hazard to take up the mantle and really go to the floor as Chelsea's new star, and that's what he did. Really picked the team up at some difficult moments and really led the team at points. And I think that was a player that's just going to be so fondly remembered and will be remembered in a Chelsea shirt in his career. Really defines for me a period of time, and I think that's what Hazard has done. And even though he has left now, he goes with no ill will, and really for me is one of the greatest Chelsea players I've ever seen. Now we go into the front two, and I think this player basically forced me into creating a 4-4-2 for this list. One of my favourite players to ever put on a Chelsea shirt, even though he was here for a short time. He was a nuisance, he was a headache at times, he ruffled feathers. But for me, if you're creating a team within this decade, you cannot leave this player out, and that is Diego Costa, one of the greatest strikers I've ever seen play for Chelsea. When he came in, we needed a striker, we needed a goal scorer, a presence up top, which we'd been lacking since Drogba left. And Diego Costa gave us that in spades. He terrified defences when he came into the league. He shocked them. The aggressive sort of confrontational nature of Costa will of course always go to the fore and was something we loved and adored about him, but I think his technical ability is something that I think is still underrated. I will always remember one of my favourite Diego Costa goals for Chelsea was when he scored against West Ham on Boxing Day in 14 in his first season. Go back and watch that goal, which for me basically sums up the quality of Diego Costa. He was basically Drogba 2.0 for Arsenal, and that was a great thing to see. And even though he did leave very soon and was a disruptor at times, and I'm sure would have annoyed some fans by his departure, for me was someone I loved watching, and I think adored him as a player we still miss, and is one that I cherish fondly at the club. So Diego is in my 11. And I think it's only fitting that the final name on this 11 is Didier Drogba, an icon within Chelsea. His right boot gave Chelsea the Champions League. And I think that Drogba, although of course when you actually look at it within this decade, didn't play for Chelsea a lot within this decade. He left in 2012, came back for one more year in 14-15 and then left over that. But I think his contribution is iconic, a legend at the club, a god at Chelsea really when you think about it, of the impact he's had at this club, the amount of big goals he scored, FA Cup final goals, that run to the Champions League final, the equaliser in the final to keep us in the game and take it to extra time and then to penalties, and then being in the man to step up and score the winner. I think another player who really defined this decade in another way, you know, if you put Hazard, you'd probably put Drogba second, just based on importance and impact within the squad and within Chelsea as a club in their history. He came back, had a great farewell, lifting the Premier League trophy before departing, and will always go down as one of Chelsea's greatest ever players, and firmly deserves his place within this side. So Didier Drogba finalises the team of the decade. So that is it, my team of the decade. I'm sure it's going to be quite contentious, the names I did leave out, but that is my 11. Let me know your 11s in the comments below. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again.